Hello, hello, hello. I'm author and entrepreneur, the cerebral palsy vigilante, Zachary Fennell. And I kind of didn't point to Fennell there, I pointed to vigilante. Anyways, you get the gist of things. Today, as you can also see, I'm with a guest. Her students would know her as Ms. Kovacs, but I know her from our days at Notre Dame College, Rebecca. And so, first, thank you for joining.
Sure, happy to help. Happy to join in.
Excellent. And now all of you out there are probably wondering, oh, great, Ms. Kovacs or Rebecca, however you want to call her, she's here. What's she going to do? Like, what's this video going to be about? We're going to discuss today. Rebecca has worked in education now for at least 8 years, and she's spent both time as general education and then also in special ed. And today we're going to kind of gain wisdom from her experiences as a teacher, specifically with what some of you out there might find daunting or frustrating, depending on whether you're a student or a parent, and that is the IEP process. Before we go any further, let me first ask you, Rebecca, for those who don't know out there, what is an IEP?
Well, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and what it is sometimes there's a disconnect between what's happening in the classroom and what's happening with a specific student. So a student will go through an evaluation process, and if they qualify, they're going to be part of the IEP program, which is where they have a more individualized learning path, and they have sometimes accommodations set in, sometimes pull-out time to work more one-on-one with the teacher, and sometimes the teacher will push in to help make sure that they're getting what they need in the classroom. There's no one way to do an IEP, so there's no one right answer to it, but it's an individualized program for each student who qualifies.
I think that's a great point to highlight, is that it is an individual thing. So that's why no two IEPs are going to be the same, because each student is going to have their own unique circumstances and accommodations that they call for. And something you did, and correct me if I'm wrong, but an IEP is associated with the Americans with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, correct?
Sure.
And so we've answered so we've explained what an IEP is, and then before I mentioned how it could be a daunting task to kind of, to go through an overwhelming process, and the way it works, and this is why I had an IEP when I was a kid due to my cerebral palsy, and I remember having an IEP meeting at least once a year, and we discussed what would be on my IEP, what kind of accommodations. For example, after I had surgery the summer of 8th grade, going into 9th grade, some of the things that were additional added to my IEP was the ability to walk around with a backpack, so I wouldn't have to carry books. I also had a cane that year, so it would have been very difficult to carry books and a cane, or I ran out of hands. So I had a backpack, that was one. I also didn't use the stairs at school, I was using the elevator. That would be something that was on my IEP. And so those are just a couple examples of something that would be on an IEP. Talking about getting there and having that discussion of what should be on the student's IEP, do you have advice based off your experience in IEP meetings that you can give a parent out there, or perhaps a student who wants to be more vocal and wants to be heard in their IEP meeting? What advice would you have to give them so that they can get the best accommodations possible for them?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a good point that you brought up some of the accommodations that were on your IEP. And what people are going to find is that the accommodations are going to differ per student and per need. So you mentioned a lot of physical needs that were being addressed, the book bag and the cane. Some students may not have anything physical on their IEP, and it may be a lot more academic. It may be to help with distractions. It may be something along the lines of having
extra test time,
having closed notes, which are kind of the notes pre-typed out, but they also have blank spots in them so that students who become fatigued by writing too much don't have to write all the notes, but still have to follow along and write in the important parts. It's important to remember that the accommodations that are put in are a team decision. So that means that the teachers and the school psychologists...
Let's back up a second and let's answer what's the makeup of an IEP team? Who is on the IEP team?
Okay. The base IEP team is going to typically, and this is going to change for every student, per school, typically will include the parent, the teacher, which would normally be the gen ed teacher depending on the school, the intervention specialist who will be working with the student, a lot of times a school psychologist if there's an occupational therapist needed or a speech pathologist needed. That would also be someone who would be involved in the meeting. Students are also greatly encouraged to be a part of the meeting. Sometimes that varies based on how comfortable the student is working with the adults and if they want to be a part of the meeting and their age. Not everyone's comfortable bringing in the 3-year-old to the meeting because maybe they're going to struggle a little bit to stay focused, because an IEP meeting can be a lot of detail and can be a lot to look through all at once. But if people know what they're looking for, that will help them to be able to listen more carefully and be a more active part of the process, so that everyone who's a part of the actual IEP can contribute to the meeting.
And unless I wasn't listening carefully, I think that I'm not trying to hear you mention, but the parent is also a part of the IEP team as well.
Yes, the parent is a full and active member of the IEP team. Traditionally, this parent won't be writing the IEP. A lot of times the parent might be brought in during the final IEP meeting to look over the final draft. However, at the IEP meeting, that is a draft, and that is something that the parent has to sign off on. And there's a section on the IEP that says, yes, I agree with the IEP and the way it's going to be implemented, or I was there, I was present, but I disagree with this because whatever discussions happened during the meeting, maybe due to time constraints, we weren't able to come to a consensus, so we're going to make an adjustment before we go forward on this. Or maybe it's something that the team wasn't able to come to a consensus, and that sign-off will still happen to indicate that the parent was still there, was still a part of the meeting, but there was a disconnect somewhere along the line, and it may be readdressed later.
To paraphrase what you've mentioned, is with the parent's role in the IEP team, it really is kind of like the parent is just there as, I don't say just there as, but is a contributor as who is going to know the student better or the kid better than the parent. And so the parent's able to say, well, this is what it's like at home with my kid. I think I think that's a carryover from the school day. What can we do to address it? So yeah, like you said, the parent isn't writing the IEP, but it really helps when they contribute because they know their child so well.
Yes, exactly like you pointed out. The parent isn't at school. The parent can't see how the child struggles at school unless the parent comes in and does an observation. However, when the child goes home and starts crying because they were so frustrated but they didn't want to show it at school, no one knows that except for the child and the parent. When the parent sees that the child isn't getting their work done and that they're maybe disorganized in a way that maybe the teacher didn't catch because there are 20 to 30 other students in the classroom and maybe it just wasn't noticed, that's something the parent can definitely pick up on. The parent also knows the child's interests, likes and dislikes, what works best for them. How do you get your child to best do their chores during the day? Maybe there's something that you're doing at home that works great that the teachers haven't found, and maybe that's why there's a behavior problem at school, because the teachers haven't found that way to connect in the way that you have. And there's a lot of things that can be contributed. So just as the teacher knows what's going on during the school day, the parent knows what's going on during the other 16 hours of the day, and that is two sides of a different coin that both need to be equally viewed and taken into consideration.